Well, I think I talked about this a little last time I was at the Q&A with you guys. It feels like there's two ways to get into writing. It's either be so undeniably good that people would be stupid to not hire you, and that's not me, or you become an assistant and you just ingratiate yourselves with all these writers and learn as much as you can and absorb as much as you can and slowly get better over time, which is what I did.
It's the Deadline Junkie Screenwriting Podcast with your hosts, Jordan Amiola, Kirsten Porter, and Rand Shammy.
Sorry, to back up, how did you get the internship at Rick and Morty?
I had a classmate that was working on the first season who was just a good dude and got me an interview over there at the animation studio that was producing it. And they felt like I'd be the right person to put stickers on books and change.
I was just thinking, this guy looks like he knows how to put stickers on things.
A lot of stickers on books.
And then you would return to Rick and Morty as a producer years later. What was that jump like?
Yeah, that was the grand return. The big "I told you so" tour. Yeah, I told you guys I was talented. No, that was. I mean, I came up under Dan Harmon, and after the first season of Rick and Morty, I was a writer's PA on season 5 of Community, Dan's show. And I had written over that time the pilot for Heels, this wrestling show. And so that kind of took off and got me noticed as a writer and not a sticker putter right around that time. And that kind of carried me through, I guess, 2017. We'd sold the show to Stars, and then they had picked it up and we'd had a mini room that I had run, and we'd written a good deal the first season, and we just couldn't get it over the hump to get it made, couldn't get it cast. And so it went on a shelf. And so then in 2018, I was like, all right, well, so much for my meteoric rise. My career is a failure, and I came slinking back to Dan, and I said, will you hire me as a writer? And they did. They brought me on, and so I got to write for season 4 of Rick and Morty, which was amazing and so cool to get to go back as a writer.
Yeah, not a bad place to slink back to.
No, so great and so valuable because the truth is, I'd had 2 jobs in a writer's room at that point, writer's PA and showrunner. And there's a hard leap to running a writer's room. You know, the only person you know who to tell to do is the PA. It's like, all right, here's how the lunch menu should look. And so it was great to go to Rick and Morty and get the experience as a writer on the staff. Work under Dan. I worked under Mike McMahon, who was the showrunner of that season. Mike has since created Solar Opposites, Star Trek Lower Decks, and was a great leader and teacher. And that was just a great experience that, you know, got me ready for the next step, which was Loki the following year.
I love hearing about like projects that are like your babies and your passion projects. And it seems like Heels is that for you. How did it come off the shelf?
Yeah, well, I had finally made my peace with its demise. I stopped like driving past Stars with my wife and looking at our old writer's room and being like sighing. She's like, this is awful. So you gotta stop doing this. And I made my peace with it, and we were writing Loki in I guess the spring or summer of 2019, and they called and said, look, we, you know, as we said, we still love this and we're looking at reviving it. And then, you know, I was not going to be able to run it. And so we had to find a partner, and that became Mike O'Malley, who, you know, is a tremendous actor and had graduated into writing. He worked on the staff of Shameless, and then he created Survivor's Remorse on Stars. And so Mike came in and really helped finish kind of the writing of the show, of which there was still a good amount to do. and he was the captain that saw that thing through production. So I had to let him adopt my child, and he was and now we co-parent in a way, and the metaphor is going to fall apart, but it's been it's been a really pleasant, great collaboration.
Could you talk some about your journey to becoming a staff writer? We know you worked as a writer's assistant and script coordinator, but what was your story? How'd you make that leap?
Well, I think I talked about this a little last time I was at the Q&A with you guys. It feels like there's two ways to get into writing. It's either be so undeniably good that people would be stupid to not hire you, and that's not me, or you become an assistant and you just ingratiate yourselves with all these writers and learn as much as you can and absorb as much as you can and slowly get better over time, which is what I did. I was at How I Met Your Mother for 2 years, and then Raising Hope for a year, and then the Tim Allen Show for a year, and then Life in Pieces. I started as the script coordinator. And it's tough because when you first start, like at How I Met Your Mother, everyone was super smart and super talented. So like you're very hesitant to pitch jokes, you're hesitant to pitch stories. Really, the only time I ever pitched is if there was a lull for more than like 35 seconds. Then I'd like, what if Marshall has this joke about a bear? It's like, great, okay, let's use that. Joe had something. But as you start to gain confidence. Like, so by the time I'm on my third show or fourth show, it's like at Life in Pieces, I'd now been a writer's assistant script coordinator for 5 years, 6 years. So it's just like, I'm trying to pitch as much as a staff writer because I'm sick of being an assistant. I need to, at this point, you have so much confidence that's also juxtaposed with so much resentment that you're just throwing everything you can out in the hopes that someone will be like, oh, he's not bad, let's hire him. And it worked. I got promoted halfway through that first season of Life in Pieces, and then it was on for 4 years, and it was great.
And then how did you get rep? Did it happen before or after your first staffing job?
I had another, all my stories are so weird. I got an agent because at the time I was a writer's assistant on How I Met Your Mother. And I don't know if it's still a thing. West Side Rentals was a big thing where you basically like somebody would have a password for West Side Rentals and you'd like share it. And then they'd have it for like a week because it cost like $50 and nobody had any money in the assistant world. So I remember I went to Syracuse, and there was a Syracuse listserv out here. Basically anybody that went to Syracuse that was working in entertainment was on this email chain. And it was mostly for like, hey, I have a PA job available, or hey, I have this old couch on my curb, come pick it up. But I had a West Side Rentals account, and I found a place. So I posted it on the website, on the listserv, saying, here's my West Side Rentals account. If anybody wants it, it's probably going to be active for another 10 days, whatever. And a bunch of people said thank you, and a bunch said whatever. And then this one girl had some like snarky response, and I thought it was funny. And I noticed that in her little email signature, it said CA, Assistant CA Lit Department or something, or some version of that. So I said something back to her, and I made some joke, and then she made another joke. And basically it ended, we exchanged emails like 5 or 6 times, and she goes, well, this has been a lot of fun, but I'm about to get on a plane and I can't really talk anymore. And I said, oh, great. So you have plenty of time to read something. Can I send you a script? And she read the script. And by the time she had landed, she had already sent it to her boss at CAA, and he was interested in repping me. And then I was repped by that guy. And then when she was promoted to agent, like a year later, she became my agent. So now I think she's the head of the lit department. Don't quote me on that, but I think she's the head of lit at CAA, but I'm not sure. But it was only because she had CAA in her email signature. I took a shot. I took a shot.
Just like in the writer's room, pitching those jokes.
It's just shamelessness. You're never going to get anywhere unless you take a shot. I'll email somebody I haven't talked to in 4 years. Hey, I heard you're hiring. You know who's great? Me. Like, there's just I think people get it. I think people understand that you can't have shame out here. You got to find your next gig. It's just fine.
Yeah.
That was I was so awed to be in Hollywood and to have this opportunity to be on the 90210. It was a big show, and I just tried to sort of soak up everything that I've so many mentors still from that show, because I was like this very young, naive person, be like, tell me everything, teach me your ways. And after a year, she left, and they were going to bring in some new showrunners. And I got a call from a woman named Liz Merriweather, whom you might be familiar with.
New Girl.
And she said, I just created a show called New Girl. and I heard that you survived a year on Rebecca Sinclair's desk. And I'd love to meet you. So I went and had coffee with Liz Merriweather, who was like, I think the show's gonna go. I think like it might be a hit. What do you want to come work for me? And then the next day I had a meeting with the new showrunners in 90210 who said, we're first time showrunners, we're here, you really know everyone, and you know, because I learned everything my first year, like, will you stay and help us? And it really agonized over those two, like, New Girl seems like this, it's going to be this like sexy new show, and 90210 though I know and I'm comfortable with, and I had this like really long sort of agonizing weekend, and I called my friend John, who was a little further ahead on his career path than and I said, I called everyone that I knew to get opinions, and some people were like, don't be an idiot, go to New Girl, it's going to be huge. Other people were like, well, you know everyone at 90210, you can't mess it. Anyway, back and forth. And then John finally gave me the advice that that sealed it, which was, don't ever chase the sexy when you're trying to get in, because he said, you know, I took a job with a very famous director right out of college, and it was a big deal, and everyone's heard of him, and I didn't learn anything that year. I could brag that I was working for this very famous person, but it didn't help me get anywhere, and I didn't learn anything. And he said, so, you know, he said, New Girl's going to be huge. They're pulling in the 30 rock writers. They're pulling in the United States of Terror writers, and they are never going to give an assistant a script. And he said, so what you need to do is figure out if 90210 is ever going to give assistants a script, because if they will, you should stay there and try to get a script. And he said, and if they won't, then, you know, fuck it, go over to New Girl and meet some new people and make some new connections. But your goal isn't to be on a show that's going to impress your friends and family when you post it on Facebook. Your goal is to get onto a show that has a path into writing. And so I went back to the 90210 showrunners and I said, here's the deal. I want to be a writer. I want to do this. I'm not going to learn anything new. I learned every single thing there was about 90210 last year. Like, I can say with certainty that nobody knows 90210 better than I do. And so the only thing left is like to know that maybe you'll help me like get ahead and get on this path to writing. And they said, give us 1 year on our desk as our assistant so we can get our feet under us as showrunners, and then we'll make you writer's assistant and give you a freelance. And so I called Liz Merriweather and I turned her down, and no, I didn't. I chickened out. I wrote her an email and she never responded. And I, for many years, dreaded the day that I'd run into her. And then I finally did last year, and she had no idea who I was. Didn't even remember. And I stayed at 90210, and sure enough, I did a year on their desk, and they said, you know, whenever you're not working, whenever you're not busy, come sit in the room, come listen, come, you know, like they were really mentorly showrunners. And then they kept their promise, and they put me in the room the next year as writer's assistant and said, your writer's assistant, but pitch as much as you want, contribute as much as you can, and we'll give you a script. And they were true to their word. And then we got canceled, and I went on to be a writer's assistant on another show. And after a few months, I got a call from some writers from 90210 who had taken over another show's showrunners, and were like, we're going to staff you. So it was like that year in that room where I was really empowered to have a voice and speak and pitch that got me my first staff job too, because those writers were like, you were so great as an assistant, we'd love to bring you in as a staff writer. So that was a very long story. Sorry.
I loved it.
Kind of cutting back to Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Rand and I are huge fans of the show.
Oh, thank you.
I remember when she won the Golden Globe, like that was a big deal. As a fan, I was like, yes, Rachel won. I remember I saw an evening with Rachel Bloom at the Largo, I think it was, at the end of season 1. So anyways, I want actually personally, I wanted to know, how did you meet? And then also, what was the workflow like with you?
Well, I mean, funny enough, Rachel and I met in the same sketch group that Doug and I started at NYU, Hammercats. Rachel became the director of it after I graduated, and we were friends for many years. And then one thing led to another, and we started kissing. And you know, so we have always been sort of collaborators and creative soulmates, and people who like really, it's our favorite thing. I mean, we talk about comedy and writing and musicals and all that stuff pretty much every day, all day. It's just the texture of our long running conversation. And so, you know, and then you were asking what the sort of process was from from love to TV.
Yeah.
Wow, from love to TV, our 20 years in Hollywood. That's
Yeah,
the name
exactly.
of your.
Yeah.
I mean, so Rachel, specifically, me and a couple other directors that she knew, we'd help her make these music videos for like original songs that she had. That was a big part of her sort of journey, was like recognizing like, oh, like I'm here at UCB with all these other comedians. What differentiates me from them? And and a big part of that journey was like figuring out like, oh, like she would keep her sort of musical skills in a box separate from her comedy. And eventually, like when she realized like how much they can and should be married, it really, things started really click for her. And so she would make these like amazing comedy songs and music videos, and then would, for years, she had two or three failed musical comedy pilots, stuff that like either were bought and were shot and no one picked up, or stuff she sort of tried to take out with other people to sell, and they were all great in their own different ways. And then the tastes in Hollywood are very cyclical. Musicals at the time were really derided, and so nobody really took it very seriously, even though she had really developed a pretty like legit online following for this sort of stuff. It should have been enough proof of concept, but the tastes at the time were not like enough there. And then, like La La Land is part of like this like little shift in the culture where like she was developing it around the same time, and then Aline Brosh McKenna and her met kind of randomly after Aline saw one of her music videos. And Aline is obviously this like, world beating screenwriter for Devil Wears Prada and many other things. And they teamed up on this Crazy Ex-Girlfriend idea. And it was like this really wonderful marriage of like Aline's sort of rom-com tastes with Rachel's really weird, subversive musical energy. And it became this beautiful show. And Doug and I were there from the beginning, helping out and filling in the gaps wherever they needed help. And so we kind of did everything on that show in weird little bits and spurts, however it needed that. I was a terrible actor on the show, and had several. I actually played my own evil twin. So thank you for those SAG residuals, Aline and Rachel.
So how did that world lead to you acting and writing eventually?
So crazy enough, as I went to go see Cedric and D.L. Hughley and Bernie, the Kings, first comedy show I ever seen in my life. I didn't even know you guys do comedy for a living. I thought just people did it on TV and that was it. I didn't know they had actual comedy clubs that weekly. So I started doing comedy locally around town, started making a buzz. And this promoter, there was a homecoming at FIU, and D.L. Hughley was the headliner. They needed an opener for D.L. So I got booked to be the opener. I go do the show, and DL saw me, and he was like, yo, you funny, man. You want to go on the road with me? I was like, what? So I started going on the road with DL Hughley. Then I'm in Cleveland with him one weekend, and Cedric is in town. Cedric comes to see him to say hi and walks in the club. As I'm on stage, he sees me. He goes to DL. He's like, yo, who's that dude? I was like, that's my new opener. He's like, man, you might have this one too. So that's how I started working with Cedric. And then that led to him getting TV shows. He was just like, yo, man, I think you would be funny in the writer's room. And I was like, what? Man, I don't know nothing about writing. He's like, man, don't worry about it. Just go in there, be funny, you'll learn it. And then here we are.
Wow, that's awesome. That's quite the right place and the right time.
Yeah, man, it's just one of those things. That's why I always tell people, if you have a will, don't worry about the how. It'll present itself. Just do it, and all the opportunities will present themselves.
Yeah.
You already answered
So
our
did-
first question too about the neighborhood. We had like, how did you get in the neighborhood? But now you kind of already answered it.
Yeah, that's how I got to the neighborhood. Yeah.
You can find these podcast episodes in full on my website at www.jordanemiola.com.
Subscribe, rate, and review for more episodes. Thanks for watching the Deadline Junkies Screenwriting Podcast.